Hi, welcome to this follow-up video where we will be looking at several SEEK reports from various districts in Kentucky. This is a companion to the previous video that we completed learning about the Kentucky school finance model called SEEK, Support Excellence in Education in Kentucky. These SEEK reports from these 5 districts will help us understand that SEEK funding model and sort of bring it to life at the district level. The intent here is for you to develop an understanding, not to really look at the financing at the district level and be able to complete this financing and formulate a district budget, but just understand from the school level perspective how this funding comes together and how it operates for your district and then eventually for your school. And so let's take a look at the districts that we are taking that we are going to focus on. We're going to start with Davis County. Davis County is a rather large district in the Owensboro area, a district I used to work in. Let's start by just taking a look at a couple of different core pieces and finding some core pieces of information. First of all is the guaranteed base. We talked about in the prior video that guaranteed base you can see for this 2022-23 final SEEK calculation is $4,100. Remember, this is an amount of money that's set by the General Assembly. So it comes from the legislature in the state budget every 2 years when it's set. And so this will go into these SEEK reports for every district. It will look the same. And so when you go sliding over, you can see the inputs. And the key inputs, first of all, is the size of the district. This is the ADA. So the ADA in the Davis County Schools, 10,563.189 students. Okay. And you can see how that is broken down based on the number of at-risk students. Remember, there's an add-on, and we'll look at that add-on in a minute. Okay, you can see the number of at-risk students, and then you can see based on the December 1 child count, the students that are considered exceptional children that qualify for special education. And so where we look at these high, moderate, and low categories, don't think of that in terms of the kind of disability. Even though it is qualified by the type of disability, high is high prevalence. That means there are more commonly speech students than there are severe disabled students. So that's a low incident rate. You get more money. The weight is 2.35 for the severe, whereas it's only 0.24 for the speech, for the high incident, the majority, the large number of students. You can see that is reflected there. And then, of course, the home hospital, 22.68 students, and your limited English proficiency students. So those are the add-ons. If you move over to the calculation, you can see adding that calculation for the at-risk students adds an additional $300 per student, $9 for home hospital, $700 for all the special ed. The transportation formula based on the size of this district. Davis County is a large geographic district, so it's going to be, so they're getting $437 per student for transportation, and then limited English proficiency. And so you can see that ups the SEEK calculation to 5,589 from the 481 based on the composition of the students in the district. Okay. You multiply that out by those 10,000 students, and that's what you see in this total column, okay? Now, we talked previously about the local effort, the required 30 cents per 1,000 property valuation local effort. So this is the amount of money that comes from that local effort per student and overall. And so that is actually subtracted out of the SEEK allocation at the state level, and that lowers that 5,589 to 3,545. Okay. And so that part is adjusted. Now we're going to talk about tier one, but before we talk about tier one, let's look at the property values in the district where these taxes are coming from. And so here in the input column where it says assessment, this is the total property value assessment in Davis County in their district boundaries, 7.1 billion. And that amounts to 681,180 per pupil. And so remember, to qualify for tier one, you have to, that amount is going to be lower than the per pupil assessment at the state level. So on all the SEEK reports, you can see the statewide equalization, which is roughly the average state assessment required to qualify for tier one. You can see it's a little over $1 million, okay, at the state level. And so Davis County's is below that, which signals that they qualify for tier one. If Davis County's per pupil assessment would be over this $1 million, then they wouldn't qualify, or they wouldn't qualify for as much of this tier one equalization funding. Remember, tier one is the funding that basically equalizes property value districts that are poorer than the state average. And so this Davis County property value is lower than the state average property value if you look at all of those. And so they qualify for tier one. And so they qualify based on the formula for $286 per pupil, which is a little over $3 million for the whole district. And so that goes through an adjustment process, and you can see that $3 million then is added to that overall state SEEK. And so Davis County, before we start getting into the final adjustments, is looking at about $40 million in state SEEK funding, not getting into capital outlay and some other things that we're going to talk about in a moment. So far you should understand then how that base SEEK translates based on the composition of the district, and how tier one operates based on the assessed property values that you can see for the district, and get an idea a little bit of what the district looks like. And we'll look at a few other districts in a moment. But the last thing I want to turn to is I want to turn to this Nichols calculation box in the lower left-hand corner. This Nichols calculation is the funding for facilities. You assess 5 cents at least in what they call FSPK funding, at least 1 nickel, and the state will then match that nickel for covering the cost of your buildings and grounds. Any new construction, maintaining instruction, and then there is an additional amount of money called capital outlay money that is also generated as part of the total guaranteed base SEEK, which is again is a SEEK calculation. So all of that goes into operating your physical facility. So you can see Davis County has then the opportunity, they generate through FSPK all of these nickels that allow them to pay for their physical plants, those new schools that they've built, and maintaining some of those other schools that they've built. Plus this capital outlay, which is an annual amount of a little more than $1 million as well. And so that is a good way to understand a little bit about how this district is funded. You can see the overall state calculation, and subtracting out the calculation for the 30-cent local effort and the capital outlay ends up that the school district has about $31.7 million to spend for the educational costs of their students. So let's do some comparisons and looking at a couple of different districts here. One of these districts is Fayette County. Fayette County is a larger district. You can see their ADA is about 38,000 students, okay? And you can see in looking at the composition of their at-risk population, okay, they have a little larger at-risk population, and so their calculated base is actually going to be similar, but it's going to go down because their local effort's going to generate more money. Because their property values are higher. So let's look at their total assessment. You can see their total assessment, 38 billion. We can't really compare that because Lexington's a lot larger than the Owensboro area. But if you go to the per pupil assessment, you can see that per pupil assessment is a little above $1 million. It still qualifies them for a small amount of tier 1 money, $3 per pupil. Okay, contrast that to the much more significant amount that we saw in Davis County and that we will see in a few other districts. And so you can see generally that becomes a major factor as you look at that. The other thing that you'll notice is they don't receive as much funding as far as the nickels are concerned. Now they generate, because of the property values, much more money to service a larger district, but they don't have as many nickels for facilities as Davis County does, but they generate a much larger local effort because of the value of their property. And so that's really how the equalization formula works very effectively through CARA to equalize a district like Davis County compared to Fayette County. Let's take a look at the largest district in the state. This is Jefferson County, just so you have an idea of what this looks like on a large urban scale district. You can see almost 90,000 students, 87,700 students. You can see the composition of their at-risk population is much larger. So their calculated base funding is going to be more. But again, their local 30-cent effort is going to be higher because their property assessment, it goes over that 1 million mark. And it will, in this case, qualify them for 0 tier 1 money. Okay, 0 tier 1 money because their local effort generates that much money for their district to be able to afford what they need to afford. And so you can see on a per pupil basis, they receive less SEEK than Fayette County and Davis County, mostly because their local effort is higher. Okay. But you can see overall, when you factor this into the size of their district, the scale here, their budget is $181 million. You also see they receive a negligible amount of money for facilities, which is a big issue in Jefferson County. Again, having to use that local effort for their facilities where there's not very much on the state side to support, or not any on the state side to support their facilities. Okay. And then let's turn to Owensboro Independent. You can see Owensboro Independent mirrors some of what you'll see in Jefferson County because it's a small urban area, very densely populated district. Not going to receive as much transportation money as these other districts because their geographic boundaries are much smaller. Their property assessment is the lowest. And so as a result, tier 1 dollars are going to be higher in Owensboro per capita, per student, than any other district, and their total SEEK allocation is $5,000 per student. So you can see what that was compared to Jefferson County and even Fayette County. Okay, and so overall, again, smaller student population, about 4,500 students in their ADA, and you also can see the facility side of things receiving 2 nickels from the state. And because of the composition of the district, that nickel from the state is actually going to exceed the nickel because of local property values and the level of the local property value. So you can learn a lot about a district. You also see that the district has a large at-risk population, so it sort of mirrors Jefferson County in its at-risk population, but it doesn't mirror Jefferson County in the local effort and the property assessment. So as you can see, the state is giving it more money as a result of that, because that's the way the equalization formula works, and that's the way CARA works as far as school funding. The last one that we'll look at is a growing district, and that's the Warren County district. You can see the ADA is 15,000. You can see the profile is probably more similar to a Fayette and a Davis County as far as their at-risk population. And you can see, however, with the property assessment, is below that 1 million threshold. So they are going to qualify for $200 per pupil in Tier 1 funding. And they also are going to have a pretty steady SEEK amount of 3,400. Again, contrast that to what we saw in Fayette, in Davis, in Jefferson, and Owensboro. They kind of sit in the middle there based on the at-risk population and based on the Tier 1 level for their school district. They have, as a district, had the opportunity to capitalize on growth monies. This year, it actually didn't happen that way. But in previous year, they have been one of those districts that have grown so fast that that adjustment in the mid-year allowed for a growth calculation that gave them some additional money from time to time. And so you can see in looking at these SEEK reports, you get a pretty good understanding of how the funding formula operates to equalize those property poor districts, and to allow those property rich districts still to receive a base amount of funding and receive add-ons based on the population that they serve. And so the population parameters, the value of property taxes, and the state effort versus the local effort are all part of this sliding scale that make our funding formula work in a very unique way from an equity standpoint to support our schools.